Rockets and Knicks were in Game 5 when O.J. started that fateful drive. His four-way hazard lights were blinking, and no one knew what the Jews was thinking.
I've been to Reno, Chicago, Fargo, Minnesota, Buffalo, Toronto, Winslow, Sarasota, Wichita, Tulsa, Ottawa, Oklahoma, Tampa, Panama, Mattawa, La Paloma, Bangor, Baltimore, Salvador, Amarillo, Tocopilla, Barranquilla, and Padilla, I'm a killer. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Crossed the desert bare, man. I breathe the mountain air, man. Of travel I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
This is Oversight Live, your advocate for good governance. We're putting the site back in. Oversight. Here's the watcher on the wall, your host, Ben Carpenter.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Oversight Live this Monday, the 20th of April. We're getting started here. We're going to have a good conversation. We're taking a step away from the recent conversations about a gas line pipeline and turning to something else that's going to be front and center in the legislature here very, very soon. But first of all, Oversight Live. Look, in Alaska, you know that the state capital is down in Juneau, and you can only get there by plane or by ferry, and no road, which makes it prohibitively expensive for most people to go, either time or money. And it is definitely harder than most Americans have a time going and providing oversight and watching and seeing and engaging with their elected leaders. So what I have done is I'm going to bring the legislature to you in a couple different ways. All right. Not having a road is a major inconvenience, but it's not a good excuse for not paying attention, not understanding what's going on out there. We have technology. Most all of our meetings that occur in the legislature, our legislature, the people's legislature, they're telegraphed. They're recorded and broadcast, so you're able to listen and watch and participate. Sometimes they have times when you can call in and give your 2-minute testimony. But sometimes watching, you're not sure what's going on because the legislature does speak kind of a different language. All right. Well, that's where I come in. I've spent 6 years down in the legislature, and I want to help you understand what's going on down there. So I'm going to do my best to answer your questions and help you understand what is actually being said. In order to do that, I'm going to bring you video. So I'll bring you some clips and show you some things. You can also go watch the same video without my commentary if you want. I'm going to be upfront and honest. I'm a fiscal and social conservative, and so that's the lens by which I see life and the world. So that's going to come out. An advantage for you is you don't have to, you're going to filter that out, but you don't have to filter out the liberal bias that you get from the news media, who won't even admit that they have a bias, right? If you want to know the truth, you got to go to the data, the raw data. Well, that's what we're going to use. And you're going to get to watch it and listen to it as we participate here. If you have questions during the live broadcast, go ahead and chat them to me. We're broadcasting on YouTube, Facebook, and X. And if you've got a question, go ahead and shoot it out to me, and I'll do my best to answer your question. If you're watching the recording, drop me an email if you've got a question, producer at OversightLIVE.com, and I will do my best to answer your question on air or send you an email. Either way, if you've got a good question, the odds are somebody else has got that question. So we're going to use it. We're going to answer it. We're going to edify everyone so that we understand what's going on in our government. And we're going to attempt to have fun. All right. So let's get started tonight. So what I have for you is stepping away slightly from the legislature. We will be watching a couple of legislators, but we will not. This will not be a legislative meeting. One of the subscribers or viewers here turned me on to this meeting. I did not watch it live, but it is a meeting of an organization called Commonwealth North, and you may have heard of this organization. A number of Alaskans get together and talk about things that matter to Alaskans and host other events and things like that. So Commonwealth North pulled together some legislators to talk about the permanent fund dividend, the permanent fund program, the permanent fund itself. Just have a conversation about this, and they titled the talk "Revisiting the Permanent Fund Compact." You can find it on YouTube if you just search that Commonwealth North, or add in "Revisiting the Permanent Fund Compact." Then you'll get to see it. It'll show up because that's how I found it. You just Googled it or searched it on YouTube. Okay. And I guess actually the title that I searched is right up here it's hard to see on the screen, but it says Policy Forum : Revisiting the Alaska Permanent Fund, and it'll come right up. Okay. So you can watch it yourself. Anyway, so as you can see from the pictures here, and let me make that a little bigger, the individuals that are going to be talking here are Representative Hall, Representative Stapp, Senator Myers, Angela Rodell, and Larry Pursley. And Larry Pursley is a fixture down in Juneau. They'll get an introduction here, and you'll hear him. Angela Rodell used to head up the Permanent Fund Corporation, and the other three are sitting legislators. Okay, so the topic, like I said, is permanent fund. And the reason that this is up for discussion is because there are bills and resolutions for the legislature's consideration this term to do some things to the permanent fund, one of which is to combine the earnings reserve account with the corpus or the principal of the fund. The other major change that is being presented here in the form of a bill is to change the percent of market value draw from the 5% to a stepped approach to get to 4.5%. So those are the real two big things that this legislature is going to talk about. I am also holding in reserve some additional information that may be of benefit and use to broadening the conversation and giving some context to what you hear tonight. Let's see. This meeting just happened just recently too. Maybe the date will come up when we start playing, but it's recent. Maybe this weekend or last week. Okay. Let's get going here.
He is Larry Pursley, and I'm trying to find the bio you gave me. Here we go. Can I make it up? Because I think I could do a really good job of making up a bio here. Oh, sorry. He is a journalist, a newspaper publisher, a former federal coordinator, a longtime voice on Alaska fiscal policy. He's worked in state government, on Capitol Hill, and in newsrooms across the state. He currently publishes the Wrangell Sentinel, writes for the Alaska Beacon, and the Anchorage Daily News. He's held the Atwood Chair of Journalism at UAA and is an all-around excellent guy. Please help me welcome Larry Pursley.
I don't know about all around. I know I'm tall. That counts for something. So normally my role at things like this is to be funny and not necessarily serious, but I thought I'd sort of put that aside for a little bit. I'm not going to use 10 minutes. So I'm offering to the other four, my unused minutes are for sale. I'm privatizing my 10 minutes. So I want to open for bids. I was asked to give a little bit of the history for people who maybe aren't familiar with the permanent fund. So this opening statement isn't a premonition that it's not going to be permanent anymore. It's just an observation that it has been permanent for 50 years, protecting the principal. State has a lot of tough financial choices going ahead. I think the permanent fund is essential for those, but it could take some other forms as we move ahead and want to provide public services, invest in the future, and all the rest. Why the permanent fund? 1976 constitutional amendment. I looked, how can you define it? And I like this top definition for its brevity. You know, they summed it up in 31 words. No offense to most of us here, we couldn't say anything in 31 words. But I thought it was a great definition as to what spurred that political interest, the push behind creating the permanent fund. When North Slope leases were auctioned off and the state got $900 million in the 60s and spent it, much of it wisely. I mean, you think about Alaska, there was a lot of unmet needs back then, but there was this feeling we burned through $900 million, we blew it, it's wasted, we're never going to do that again. And this statement from Terry Gardner, who was a House member at the time, I thought summed it up well as to what drove that. You know, what was one, there were certainly a lot of reasons, but that was one of the key points in moving on. So we did in 1976, if you picked up your election pamphlet, and back then it wasn't online, they were printed, sent to everyone's mail. I highlighted the last part of this ballot summary because it became really crucial when Governor Walker cut back the dividend in half with his veto in 2016. Opponents of that went to court, and the judge ruled, hey, the earnings on the permanent fund get deposited in the general fund. It's like everything else. It's subject to legislative appropriation. Even though you have a statute that says, oh, here's this formula for calculating the dividend, and they use the formula for decades, you don't have to. It's subject to appropriation. When the vote came up in 1976, you know, we think now about all these close elections. Well, you got Anchorage municipal assembly race is 35 votes, 40 votes, or something like this. This sucker wasn't even close. I mean, this is like the fantasy of every candidate that they could win 2-1. I'm not sure we've had anything since then that's been that lopsided. The timeline was the constitutional amendment in 76. The word dividend never appeared in the amendment, the election booklet. It just, sure, some people were thinking about, well, how could we get some money to Alaskans from this wealth? But the dividend came later. Even though now, of course, they're not just attached at the hips, they're welded together. Permanent fund, dividend, that's, I think, a political problem. So the first attempt at a dividend was actually based on years of residency. The longer you lived here, the bigger check you got. Court threw that out. Alaskans hated the guy named Zobel for bringing the lawsuit. And then the backstop plan was the one size fits all, everybody gets the same amount. And the first checks went out in 1982. I really like this in doing some research. You know, Jay Hammond, or Governor Jay Hammond, who many people say the father of the permanent fund, regardless of who passes the paternity test. He was certainly there at the time. Had a dinner with the People's Republic of China premier, and that last line pretty much, to me, sums it up. There's good socialism and there's bad socialism. And handing out dividends is considered good socialism in Alaska. But it also illustrates how well known we are for the dividend in the state. Just looking at the numbers, oops, I did.
Leave it to socialists to call the money that is earned from the interest of the royalties that were deposited in the fund to be socialism, because the state of China is looking at government money, much as Larry Pursley here is looking at it as government money. And it's funny that he brings up the socialism part of this, because and I don't disagree. It is a socialist concept to have public ownership of natural resources. That is a socialist concept. It's a construct that our state has in our Constitution that says that natural resources, oil wealth, mineral wealth, all of that is owned by the people. Okay. We the people voted, like he just said, to put something in the Constitution that says, hey, we're going to save some of that money. And then the earnings off of that come to us as a check. And big government people, socialists, are going to point to that and say, oh, look, it's government money, socialism. But that's completely missing the whole point of how we've got a state and who has the power. Our Constitution says that all political power is of the people. Like we're the ones that have, and this government that we've created is there. It's only there to benefit the people. The natural resources that we own, this socialist concept, we've established this process by which we're going to individually have benefit from the investment earnings of our resources. And somehow we allow the big government socialists to say, well, this is socialist money. It's government money. It is not government money. Government, unless you are China or the United States, they can print their own money, but the state of Alaska does not print its own money. This is money that is collectively owned by the people and invested on behalf of the people. It is not government money. It is our money, the people's money. He fundamentally is missing the point of where the power comes from in government. It is not government to the people. It is people to the government.
Something I didn't mean to. God, I hate technology. Remember overheads where you'd have the grease pencil and yeah, okay. Well, I like the overheads. So just looking at the dividend numbers, first one, 1982, arbitrary number. The legislature said we'll do $1,000, even though the formula is a lot less than about 300. But since that first check, counting what you're going to get this October, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500, talking $32 billion has gone out in dividends. If you're old enough and you applied and you qualified and you weren't serving time for a felony or your third misdemeanor and you got all the checks, talking about $54,000 per person. Like I said, they followed the formula in statute. In 2016, Governor Walker said, we just can't afford this.
That's really a really appropriate statement to make here as we're summing up the history of the permanent fund. If you had been here as a state resident since the beginning, your benefit of being a collective owner of the natural resources is not in how powerful your government is, although that is a benefit to you. It is not in what services the government can provide for you, although that is a benefit. It is individually, outside of any other state, individually, you've benefited to the tune of $54,000. You can call that socialism if you want, but in capitalism, that works too. We can pool our money into an investment. We do it for retirement funds. We do it for investments, and we get dividends back from those investments of our personal funds. And nobody's considering that socialism. $54,000 to the individual person. Benefit from, not from having a powerful government, not from having a benevolent government. It's because the people voted to establish the permanent fund, and then the people's representatives created this dividend program. All stemming from our private ownership, personal, individual ownership, I should say, collective ownership of natural resources.
We're burning through savings, gotta cut it down. He vetoed it in half. So ever since then, one of the last things the legislature does every year is negotiate how much the dividend's going to be. It's just in a political appropriation now. And you're seeing it this year. Going into this session, $1,000, no question, pretty much, but with extra money coming in from high oil prices because of the president's war, a lot of pressure to increase the dividend.
And why should there be pressure to increase the dividend when oil revenue is greater? The permanent fund has nothing to do with oil revenue. It has to do with permanent fund earnings. The oil revenue is we're already benefiting from that because a portion of the oil revenue, oil royalties, got put into the permanent fund and is growing the permanent fund. The other portion of the royalties gets spent by state government. There's no connection to the price of oil and the size of the dividend. Just like there's no connection to the spend of the size of the budget and the size of the dividend. There's no connection to that. The dividend money is already there. It's permanent fund earnings. It's the legislature that's confusing the two. It has a problem, and it is looking to the dividend to solve that problem because it's the easiest way out. We know what the problem is, right? Our spending habits do not match our revenue habits.
So hopefully that's under 10 minutes.
Well done, Larry. I'm going to pretend I'm too old to understand that overhead projector reference. I was definitely not born early enough for that. Our next speaker is Angela Rodell, the CEO, our former CEO of the Alaska Permanent Fund Corporation. From 2015 to 2021. During her tenure, the fund grew by more than 60%, from 50 billion to 80 billion. Thank you. Navigated the turbulence of a global pandemic, chaired organizations like the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds and the Pacific Pension and Investment Institute, and her tenure coincided with the statutory adoption of the percent of market value draw, formally establishing the fund as a sustainable revenue source for state government.
Yeah, I want to pause before she gets in here. Senator Myers has joined us. Senator, we're going to be watching you on on this program. So hopefully you have your thick skin on. Anyway, Senator Myers says socialism is the state owning the oil. Paying to individuals based on that oil is partially returning us to capitalism. I agree. I think that if you take the socialist construct of collective ownership of the natural resources, you can't undo that. Like that is part of our fabric of our society, and you're not going to undo it. But the next best thing is to take that socialist construct and help it benefit a free market economy. And that is what the permanent fund dividend being given to individuals back to the owners of the state, right? The people are the owners of the state. So as owners, we get a dividend and then we spend it how we want. If we want to turn it over to the state in the form of a donation to the general fund, we could do that. We want to go to Hawaii, we could do that. We want to pay for oil or buy a snow machine or put it in savings for our kids, buy school clothes for our kids, put our kids through school, whatever we want to do with it. That's on us to do as owners of the state. It doesn't have anything to do with a benevolent government. It shouldn't anyway. This is why the legislature has bastardized this concept and we're off kilter. We need to be having a conversation about spending versus taxation. That's what every other jurisdiction has to deal with. You want to spend more? Tax somebody more. You don't want to pay taxes? Then deal with your spending.
Please help me welcome Angela Rodell.
Larry broke the mic, or what happened? Okay, let me fast forward this. We don't need to watch this.
And how much what happened in 2016 with the veto that Larry referred to, how much that changed how we think about the PFD.
I don't know whether she's going to get into this or not. I didn't watch her portion of this. You all know that the argument for why Walker vetoed the PFD in 2016 was because we were having problems paying our bills, right? There was this argument that we couldn't balance our budget. For the first time, we're having challenges with revenue and spending, and so he cut the PFD, vetoed the PFD, a portion of it. But you know that the money that was vetoed never got spent. It didn't get spent that year. That money sat in the earnings reserve account. And the following year, the same thing happened. The PFD got axed, and that money in the earnings reserve account never got spent. Third year that happens. It isn't 3 or 4 years later before we actually started spending that money from the earnings reserve account. And the reason is because we needed to build this earnings reserve account up. We made the argument that there was a budget crisis, but we ended up actually not spending that money in the earnings reserve account until much later, years later.
Prior to 2016, the PFD was the third rail. You did not touch it. And so here we are today, 10 years later, still debating a dividend, and the fund is trying to cook with gas, as they say. So let me just start with how unique the compact is that Alaska made. Nothing surprising. There shouldn't be anything up here that you don't already know. The 5% POMV, it's based on a 5-year rolling average with a 1-year delay. And that was intentional to allow you to close the books on the fund and the fund value. The FY26 draw is expected to be $3.8 billion. I believe the forecasted amount currently for FY27, which should be closed because it was when the 2025 fiscal year ended, will be something north of $4 billion. Created in 1976, the PFD is regarded as our social compact, is how I refer to it. It's what we agreed the permanent fund would be used for. It was passed in statute. And even though
if you can get to the point, that's a slight disagreement with Angela here. If you can get to the point where you can recognize that it's a social contract, then you can also get to the point that it's a legal contract. Like it's not just a social thing. It's in law. Like that's what the people's representatives did on behalf of the people. They put it in law. And I get it. I'm a supporter, and I understand why the legislature maintains the power of the purse, and you don't have to follow the laws through appropriation. I understand why the courts have said that. I disagree with it. I think that the legislature should follow the law or change the law if they're can't follow the law, right? But it's neither here nor there. There's a lot of laws that the legislature doesn't follow the appropriation requirements. And I think this is the tyranny that happens when the people's representatives think that they just can do whatever they want with regard to money and they don't have to deal with the law. Because the appropriations process is a different process than the slightly different than the legislative process. Okay. Appropriations process deals with appropriations bills, and then the legislative process deals with policy bills. Okay. There is a slight difference. In order to say we're not going to follow the law, or we're going to do something different socially, we're going to have a new social construct. She calls it a compact, a social compact. Okay. We're going to have a new social compact, and that social compact is going to be different than what the law is. Okay. Well, then you should be going back to the policy bill, the policy conversation, and going through the appropriations, the legislative process to put that social construct, that social compact in statute. That way it is the law, that this is what everybody is going to agree to because all of a majority of the representatives agreed to it. Okay. But that social construct or the social compact is not in law. It isn't something that the legislature, the representatives of people, agree to. What they agree to is to ignore that social responsibility, statutory responsibility, and instead just do the easy thing, hit the easy button every year, take more of the dividend, hit the easy button, because the appropriations process doesn't have to follow the statute per the Constitution. Okay. So this is the part where I disagree with the foundation of this argument.
So 50% was supposed to go for government. We really focus on the 50% that was devoted to the dividend. And we tend to forget or ignore or not talk about the 50% that government saved and that government continued to reinvest into the fund, allowing the fund to continue to grow.
I don't know what she's talking about here, because in all of my conversations with regard to the permanent fund and the permanent fund dividend, I have never forgotten that 50% of the appropriation for permanent fund was supposed to stay with government, and that for many, many decades, the government turned that right back into the corpus, their 50%, the government's portion of the 50%, and put it right back into the corpus for inflation proofing and grew the fund. Nobody forgot. I didn't forget that. I don't know whether you have forgotten that, but that's not something that I forgot. We know that 50% was the split here. 50% went to the owners of the state and 50% went to the government that we created.
So the question for the panel is a post-PFD world inevitable? And what should replace that individual compact that we created?
There's also something that regarding that 50% that's really key. The statute directs that 50%, the state's portion of 50%, the statute directs it back to the corpus, meaning you shall appropriate money back to inflation proofing. That was the whole reason why you had inflation proofing happening, because the statutes directed inflation proofing, and then the statute directed a permanent fund dividend. It all worked when you followed the statute. Like that's the beauty of the statute as your plan. You want to change the plan? Then change the statute, because that's what everybody agrees to. It provides predictability to what's happening in government. There's a process for changing the plan. What the legislature does now is just ad hoc. It is, we don't need a plan. We don't need to follow the plan that we put down on our spending plan. We just make it up every year. Sorry, if you really wanted to listen to Andrew Rodell, I'm butchering her speech. I apologize.
40 some years ago. Well, let me tell you what some other states do, because I think we can learn a lot of lessons from our peers down in the lower 48. I am not going to talk about Norway. I'm going to talk about what states do that have similar type funds. And a lot of times we don't realize in Alaska just how much work has been done in the lower 48 to capitalize and save on natural resource wealth. The Permanent School Fund for the state of Texas is the world's oldest education endowment. Think about this. They created this in 1845. 1845. I think what's really important about the Permanent School Fund is it's grown to be in excess of $65 billion over the years. It too capitalizes on oil and gas wealth. They recently, I shouldn't say recently, a few years ago, they were able to add to that because they got acreage in the Gulf of Mexico that the leases off of that continue to fund and pour money into the endowment. They have an interesting distribution rate. It is a max of 6%, which you kind of go, ours is 5%. and they say it's high, 6%, but this is averaged over 10 years, not 5 years. And so it's actually a lower. The State Board of Education is charged with determining what that draw rate should be. And then it goes to the legislature, and it is all to be used to fund public schools in Texas to ensure that all children in Texas get an education. No one receives a personal payment. There is no dividend. And so school funding looks very different in the state of Texas because they have a guaranteed dedication with the endowment of the permanent school fund. Moving a little bit to the west from Texas into New Mexico. New Mexico created their land grant permanent fund in 1912. You'll notice they have a distribution rate of 6.25%. That was just changed in 2022. They added, so they have a 5% on a POMV on a 5-year average, like we do here in Alaska. But they added 1.25% to dedicate to early childhood education. And so and that was by constitutional amendment in 2022. And I think what's really important to note here is that they've also approved a safeguard. So the fund value cannot drop below $17 billion and continue to distribute. So while it has $32 billion on their last posting, which was 2024, I haven't seen the 2025 value yet, they will continue to draw at this rate. 1.25% will go to early childhood education. The 5% will go to fund public education in New Mexico. And then if the corpus, as we would refer to it, gets drawn down and it hits that 17 billion notional amount, all the draws will stop. One of the things neither Larry or I talked about, and we're all assuming that you are very familiar with, are the odd mechanics that are the Alaska Permanent Fund. And because of our constitutional amendment, we have a separate account that appropriations are made from. None of these funds, Texas, New Mexico, and Wyoming is the one I'm going to talk about next, have these separate earnings accounts. They are all withheld, they are all encompassing into one fund. So that is a primary difference. So Wyoming also has a 5% on a 5-year average. So, you know, our 5% POMV has a lot of company out there. It has about 12 billion. Wyoming's a little bit different because they have a few different funds that they've created. This is the Mineral Trust Fund. So it is the closest to what you would recognize as the Alaska Permanent Fund. It too was created in the 1970s, similar to the Alaska Permanent Fund. It has a spending policy that is statutory, and it too has a floor guarantee. So they will not, you know, they will not draw below that floor. And like Alaska, they use this for fiscal stability to fund government services. So there is no dedicated beneficiary, but they have never paid a dividend. They have never had that individual compact versus an institutional compact.
There's a lot of things that they haven't done probably with their fund either, but we're going to specifically center in on the PFD, on the dividend, because that's what we want to kill. That's what this whole conversation is about, killing the dividend. Okay. Don't you feel bad that the state's got a budget problem? And look at these other states that have gotten wise and put their wealth in a sovereign wealth fund, and then they fund all of the important things. They fund all of government, and they don't give their people a check. They don't do that kind of socialism, do they? I mean, you see the narrative here.
So they do not see the fights in Wyoming that we see.
Tell me what the tax situation is for those 3 states. For Texas, Wyoming, New Mexico. Tell me what you pay in taxes. What portion of your wealth as a resident of those states gets confiscated by the state? Yeah, they don't pay a dividend. What kind of tax do they pay? Because all of those residents have a stake in the size of the government. I know that in Texas, you pay through the nose for your property tax. Through the nose. It is a very, very high property tax on your home. I was shocked when I was down stationed in El Paso when we were considering buying a home down there when we first moved. I was shocked at the size of property tax was half, if I remember correctly, it was going to be half or more than half of my monthly payment for the mortgage. It was ridiculous. And I said, I guess I'll try to live on base because I'm not going to pay. I'm not going to pay that. Anyway. So I guess all that to say, we have to talk about a comprehensive approach to doing finances, not just pick and choose here, right? The state of Alaska residents do not pay any taxes to the state individually. That is not like these other 3 states.
Here in Alaska. So how do we create this post-PFD, just sort of laying them all beside each other? You can see that there's a lot of similarities in how much, in what they use it for, but none of them have a citizen dividend. And we've known for a long time that Alaska is very unique with the creation of a dividend. But we can change that. We can think about whether or not that individual benefit should be changed or how it could be changed in order to make sure that the fund and the fund continues and that we have a prosperous state. So
you see that maybe I should back that up. Prosperous state and the fund continues. The prerequisite is us having a conversation about the dividend. Who is suggesting that the dividend is putting the prosperity of the state or the fund itself at risk? It has never been at risk. The dividend has never put state's prosperity or the fund itself at risk. It is our propensity to spend, just like it was in the very beginning when our first oil check came in and it was $900 million gone 1 year, just like that. We didn't have a $900 million size government, but we figured out a way to spend it all. If I remember correctly, it was like $100 million was the total size of our government then. You're talking a budget that was unheard of. It was significantly larger than what they were normally passing budgets with. Okay. Anyway, we're picking and choosing here with our arguments as to why we need to get rid of the dividend. Why other solutions to fiscal problems in the state we're not even going to talk about them.
I hope, oh, look at that, right on 10 minutes. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to John to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you so much. Everybody give Angela a round of applause. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the most controversial thing said here today is going to be that Texas got a dividend before, or a fund before we did. I don't like that at all. Representative Carolyn Hall is our next speaker. She represents Anchorage's Turnagain, Spenard, and Sand Lake neighborhoods, District 16. She was elected in 2024 as a member of the House Majority, a former television news photojournalist, and has served as the Municipality of Anchorage's Communications Director. She has a master's in public administration from UAA, also my alma mater. Please help me welcome Representative Hall.
I'm going to warn everybody, I hate speaking into microphones. I will do my best.
I was told to switch these microphones, so you try this one. Yeah.
All right, I will try this one instead. All right. Thank you very much to Commonwealth North for this opportunity to present here to you today. I'm going to start with a thesis, and my thesis is Alaska will not achieve a durable and stable fiscal plan until we figure out what to do with the permanent fund dividend. Let's start with the Constitution. The permanent fund itself is in the Constitution and is indispensable. As mentioned previously, it was created by the people in 1976 by a constitutional amendment. It created Article 9, Section 15, and its 2 sentences, 73 words, none of which are dividend. We also have other constitutional obligations, providing and maintaining public education, the University of Alaska, public health, and public welfare. It's all about having a functioning government.
A bloated government, a wasteful government, or a functioning government? What is it that we're talking about here? Because you've got a budget that's got hundreds of millions of dollars slush fund for positions that are never going to have anybody hired in them. Is that what the Constitution says we're supposed to have? Because I don't know, $100 million in unfilled vacancies, that money, $100 million, what is that to education? Would education like to have that? Could you see the legislature taking $100 million out of the dividend program to spend on education? Because I don't think the Constitution says that we're supposed to have a government any way that we want to have it. The expectation is it's supposed to be managed appropriately.
In 2016, Governor Walker vetoed the dividend, triggering a lawsuit, Wielechowski v. State of Alaska, where the Alaska Supreme Court found, absent another constitutional amendment, the dividend program must compete for annual legislative appropriation, just like any other program. The lawsuit was an important milestone in Alaska's history, proving that if we build our budget prioritizing a full dividend, we risk not meeting our constitutional obligations, including the oath of office that we take when we first are entering office. My next premise is the dividend is not a right. Rights are shielded in the Alaska Constitution in Article 1. They are guaranteed and protected in the Constitution and by the courts. The dividend is secondary to the Constitution. It's in statute. It was created by the legislature in 1982. The dividend is not a right. If it was a right, it wouldn't be up for debate every year, nor subject to legislative appropriation. So what is the dividend's value? The dividend has a tremendous value for lower income Alaskans. It helps reduce poverty by 20%. It's a lifeline that conventional safety net programs cannot replicate.
Is it the statutory dividend that reduces it by 20%, or is it the amount that the legislature gives out that reduces it by 20%? Because if 2/3 of the dividend reduces poverty by 20%, imagine if the entire dividend was given. Wouldn't that mean that you would be reducing poverty by almost 50%? What is the number you're actually wanting to communicate here? Your $1,000 1/3 dividend reduces poverty by 20%. Is that what you intend to say? Or are you using the statutory dividend amount of $3,800 would reduce poverty by 20% to get your larger 20% number?
For lower income Alaskans, especially in rural Alaska. And eliminating the dividend without compensating measures would cause harm. There are 2 additional positives that come with the dividend. It allows the opportunity for important higher education savings through Alaska's 529 program, and it allows the opportunity for recipients to donate their dividends to nonprofits through the Pick, Click, Give program.
So it helps government programs. In other words, you get rid of the dividend, there's this other small group of people who give their dividend to government programs. That would be hurt if you didn't have a dividend.
So what kind of an Alaska do we want to live in? Larger dividends make it more difficult to pay existing and future state obligations. We have a $2.4 billion backlog for deferred maintenance. Of that, $1.5 billion is the University of Alaska's deferred maintenance. In the current FY27 operating budget that the House recently passed, It includes spending nearly $1 billion for dividends. Comparatively, last year, this current year, FY26, but the checks went out last October, we spent $685 million on dividends. Comparatively, when you look at the capital budget, we spent just $180 million.
How come there's no figure for how much we spend on the operating budget? Don't you all believe that that would be a pertinent thing to compare here? If dividends is the devil, why would you not throw up the capital or the operating budget here to show where the majority of the spending is actually occurring? Because you can complain about $2.4 billion in deferred maintenance, and that's literally a budgeting decision over decades to not put money towards capital budgets. Even when we were paying a dividend, a statutory dividend, we were making decisions about deferred maintenance, right? And that was a conflict between the operating budget and the capital budget. So this deferred maintenance is 100% a spending allocation problem that has been with us for decades. It is not the dividend's fault.
This is a swoop graph, and I know it's hard to read, but the blue bars that you see, that's Governor Dunleavy's proposed FY27 budget. The red bars are the FY26 management plan. So that's our operating and capital budget. The tall blue bar that you see there on the left, that is how much the governor wants to spend on dividends. If we prioritize spending the full dividend, like the governor wants us to, it would mean zero funding for most state services and departments. No Department of Public Safety, no University of Alaska, no Department of Family and Community Services, no courts, no Department of Labor, no Department of Natural Resources. In other words, we wouldn't be meeting our constitutional obligations if we paid a statutory dividend. Alaska is in decline. We've had 13 years of net outmigration. Our schools are starved for funding and are closing. And as I'm sure some of you are aware, there are some schools, in particular in rural Alaska, that have wings and sections that are.
Rob, we'll get to you next, right? Or maybe staff is first.
Highway needs critical maintenance and repair.
You're up here soon.
That's important to business and to industry, especially on the North Slope between Fairbanks and Dead Horse. Just as the Alaska Marine Highway System, they're in desperate need for support. And there are long delays in issuing permits for businesses and SNAP benefits for those who qualify. The dividend asphyxiates our ability to provide meaningful public services Alaskans want and need. Being financially prudent carries big political.
She doesn't know where money comes from. She does not know where money comes from. You're taking investment earnings from oil royalties and you're putting them out in the private sector. You're putting them in investing them in the worldwide economy. And you're coming back with earnings from the private economy. And you're suggesting that because some of that money goes to the private economy in the state of Alaska, that meaningful public services are being asphyxiated. You might as well say that meaningful public services are being asphyxiated as I can say that word, asphyxiated by Alaskans not wanting to pay taxes. You could say that meaningful services, needed services, are being asphyxiated by wasteful government spending. Again, if you're going to spend $300 million on positions that have nobody in them, and you're going to spend that money in some manner that has no transparency, you can't tell me that we're being responsible. Well, that means that there's programs being asphyxiated because you're perpetuating a government that is wasteful. It isn't the dividend that's causing this. It is your allocation, your plan.
Risks. The dividend is a political fight every year, pitting Alaskans against Alaskans. It tears us apart. The dividend has made it politically impossible to have rational fiscal policy discussions. It has created an expectation of government cash payments that makes any fiscal reform, including broad-based taxes, politically toxic. So I propose we do two things. One, we pause the dividend until we can reasonably afford it. And two, we should focus our spending on meeting constitutional obligations and on the $2.4 billion deferred maintenance backlog.
I really hate this deferred maintenance backlog. You've got a machine that's past its date of when it was supposed to run, but it's still running. That machine, the value of replacing that goes on your deferred maintenance. If you're not going to budget for it, it goes on the deferred maintenance list. So the machine is still working. It may need to be replaced or repaired, but it's still working. It's on the deferred maintenance list. Okay. So you have to actually dig down into the deferred maintenance list to actually know what it actually means. Okay. Because that list can be padded with a whole bunch of things. It can be padded. And it is being used now to say, well, look, we've got more important spending than the dividend. Well, you could also say that you've got more important spending than some of the operating budget problems that you're trying to solve. Namely, you've got hundreds of millions of dollars in unfilled vacancies that you're spending money on. So where's that money going? Why don't you put that towards deferred maintenance?
Let's spend our money on things like rural powerhouses so that they are maintained and operational, and so that communities can have reliable heat and.
Okay, Mr. Barch, you just got here. This is Representative Hall. She represents from Anchorage, the south side out to Turnagain Arm portion of Anchorage.
Power. Let's provide running water to the 3,300 rural homes that don't have it, and that leads to poor health outcomes. Let's bring low-cost energy to Alaskans. We know how to do it, we just don't have the money to do it, or perhaps the political will. Well, we can start rebuilding our state if we temporarily pause the dividend, bring function back to state government, and improve Alaskans' quality of life. I reread Dave Rose's book, Saving for the Future, over the interim, and I want to read an excerpt. As Alaska's oil revenue shrank through the 1990s, the legislature became a chronic deficit spender, raiding accounts of one-time revenues in order to avoid, for one more year, having to impose taxes or spend permanent fund earnings. He goes on to say, Alaska paid a significant cost for allowing oil production and prices alone to determine its spending. Roads and bridges deteriorated, schools lost staff and programs, University of Alaska facilities fell into disrepair, and aid to local governments evaporated, forcing small cities to disband or face bankruptcy. Although we had ample income to cover our needs, legislators preferred to let our infrastructure fall apart rather than be perceived as raiding the dividend fund. Sounds like Groundhog Day all over again. We are choosing to do this to ourselves when it comes to our deferred maintenance and all the needs of Alaskans that are becoming quite desperate. And it doesn't have to be this way. Thank you.
So it's an interesting characterization here. I haven't read that book that she brought up. The state of Alaska for decades has this policy where we want to see more and more oil development. And now we've got a policy among some that don't, and especially at the federal level, that don't want to see more oil development. Okay. So you've got a government that has grown because you have oil development. You have a private sector that's able to support the size of your government in your state and it keeps growing. And then you do away, you put downwards pressure on the thing that's providing royalties or revenue to your state government. You make oil companies the devil, and they dry up and they go away. And then you're left with what? Taking more out of the private industry. That's what government does. It's what it has to do. So instead of taking it out of the oil company, because you can't take any more out, there's no political will there, you're going to take it from all the ma and pa's, all the businesses, all the big businesses, all the grocery stores, all the shoe stores, wherever people spend dividends in the private industry, in the private sector. You're taking that money out of their hands to fund government instead of having a oil-based economy. Now you're taking it out of this economy that's barely struggling to stay alive. And you're making them out to be little demons for wanting that money, for wanting their portion of the permanent fund. Government gets their portion. The private sector, by statute, is supposed to get its portion, but it's not. And you're making them, you're like criticizing that private sector. You owe more to pay for government. I mean, the fundamental problem is that people like Representative Hall do not understand where money comes from. It comes from private enterprise. It comes from wealth creating activity. That happens to be that our bridges and our roads and our schools and everything that we have come to enjoy over the last several decades has come from oil. But now we've got a penchant in this nation for electing Democrats, electing progressives, I shall say, that want to end oil development in Alaska and made it very hard for continued exploration of oil in Alaska. And so our private economy is suffering. We don't have low-cost energy for the rail belt. We don't have low-cost energy. Matter of fact, we're struggling to even find natural gas. We don't have low-cost energy. If you had low-cost energy, if we had have invested over the last couple of decades in providing low-cost energy to the non-oil economy in Alaska, everywhere from Fairbanks on south, then that economy could have grown, but instead it is stymied. It is plateaued or decreased. If you're hiring people, especially in the trades, that it is hard to find people in the trades in the state of Alaska. That is because there has not been the effort put forward to support a non-oil private economy. We're attacking the oil companies and we're doing nothing for the private economy. It means there is a majority of people in the legislature without any business sense. They don't understand where money comes from. And so we can move these levers and we can say, let's just tax the oil companies. Let's just take the dividend. Let's just institute taxes. And because government spending, it has to happen. We've got to have constitutional responsibilities and all this. We just got to find more money and prop up government. And you don't realize what you're saying. She doesn't know what she's saying. She doesn't know where the money comes from. All right, who's next? Rob, are you up or is it Will Stapp?
All right, thank you very much, Representative Hall. Up next, we have Representative Stapp with the House Minority. Oh, I'm sorry, there you are. I know who you are. He represents East Fairbanks, Fort Wainwright, and Badger, District 32. He's a member of the House Minority. He's an Army veteran and served 2 combat tours in Iraq. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Well, I didn't think I'd have to stand in front of people and be the first PFD defender today. It's kind of ironic, I think, So I'm going to have a little bit of different take. I'm going to actually argue that nobody in this room actually should want the dividend to go away completely, because what will happen is you'll pay massive taxes and your resources will get locked up, and you'll be basically a state that environmental tourists come here to look at fun animals, and retirees live to stay here because there won't be any industry and development and economic opportunity in the state if you do that, right? Okay, so, oops, what did I do here? I'm like Larry. Okay, that works, doesn't it? You know, maybe. You want to fix that for me, Ross? Okay. Oh, perfect. Be smarter than the clicker. Okay, so the first thing I tell folks about the dividend is, I don't know, you know, folks, I grew up poor, right? My mom died when I was 7. My dad left. I was raised by my grandparents. I joined the Army to give myself better opportunity. And I got stationed in Alaska when I was 19 years old. I was a paratrooper in the infantry. I volunteered to go to my first deployment here. Ended up deploying at a 3rd Battalion, 509th Parachute Infantry Regiment in Anchorage, Alaska for our Iraq deployment. I'm not a person who grew up with means or money. So like when people talk about the permanent fund dividend, like it's a big deal to them because it's the one thing that they count on every October to like meet their reliable daily needs. I grew up in Washington State, folks. When I came to Alaska, I became a resident because I didn't like paying taxes. So always been a Republican. That's probably the number one reason why I don't like the taxes, you know, and Alaska sounded like a great place because we didn't have the taxes. So the first thing you should probably understand is you should have a heart for people, and two, think about the public perception of the dividend because it matters. If you ask most Alaskans like what the PFD is, they think that like it's directly tied to your resource wealth, right? A lot of folks don't actually understand that it comes out of this fund that we appropriate because the royalties were deposited. They think like the more oil and gas and the more mining that Alaska does, the bigger the permanent fund dividend check is, right? Because they're told, rightly or wrongly, I'm sure it'll get into the debate, that Alaska's resource owner state, i.e. all of our resources are collectively owned by the states in the Constitution, and that this is their share of Alaska's resource wealth, right? So, you know, it just reinforces the idea that the resources in the state belong to the people of Alaska and that the check that they get every October is their share of that resource wealth, right? And that's kind of important, I think, for people to understand because if you operate under that perception, it makes like really good sense why people are so upset about the PFD, right? Because they feel like, hey, they don't own mineral rights here in Alaska and like the dividend check that they get, that's their share of these collective resources that they don't own. So the problem you have currently, as you see on the right side here, hey, oil and gas production, that's going up, state revenue, that's going up, but people's permanent fund dividends, they're going down. So you have a public perception problem, all right? What does that do? Well, last week I took a vote, I cut the dividend down to $1,500. I did that because it is the largest reliable dividend that you can afford in the event that you don't spend more money on operational expenditures. I have as Larry told you, you'll probably end up with a smaller dividend than a $1,500 PFD this year because people are going to want to spend more money, right? So these are some quotes I got. I didn't name the people because I didn't want to be too bad. The people on there that have names, there aren't real names, but you know. Remember the healthcare CEO, would love to see a public hanging again. I got thick skin, folks. So this actually doesn't bother me. And the reason I put those up there is because I don't want you to actually hate these people, right? You shouldn't be mad at these people. You should be mad at the people that tell them reasons why they don't get a full dividend. I'll be very clear. If you want a full PFD, you got to do two things, or a combination of these two things. You got to tax people, or you got to massively cut state services by $1.6 billion, okay? Those are the two things you got to do. So if you want a full statutory dividend, and you don't want to cut state services, come up here and tell me $1.6 billion in tax combination that people are going to pay. Or if you don't want to pay taxes, tell me $1.6 billion in cuts that you're going to make to state government. Okay, it really is that simple. That is that three-legged stool that you have to talk about, okay? So here are two of my colleagues. They don't say that. You know what they say? They say, we move money to the corpus so we could just pay in a dividend. Okay, what do they mean? They mean, well, if we just steal from future dividends out of your PFD today, we can pay you a bigger PFD today, so we can pay you a less PFD tomorrow. Okay? That's probably not a wise thing to do. The other one is savings. You say, yeah, Alaskans could follow its own dividend statute today. Every legislator knows this. Choosing not to do that is a policy decision. And then finally, it's not about priorities. It's about priorities, not math. Folks, numbers don't lie. People do. Okay? It literally is about math. Again, tax people or reduce government services. Those are your options. Okay? By the way, kudos to the governor. He finally decided after 7 years he'd roll out a tax bill telling people that they wanted to pay for dividends. And you know what? It was resoundingly hated, right? And I'll tell you the most interesting thing about me, all my friends in my caucus who love the full dividend, almost every single one, not a single peep saying they want to do the tax bill. Not a single person went out publicly and said, we should do big sales taxes or big industry taxes to do dividends. Why is that? I don't want to tell the truth, okay? I don't mind. Everybody knows, Will, I do not like the taxes, okay? Now, there's certain situations where, yes, you should look at oil and gas production tax. You should revise things. I just fundamentally don't believe you should have a statewide income tax or a statewide sales tax if you're going to give people a check. I just don't believe that, right? And I've said that since the first day I ran for office. It's not popular with some people. It's just what I believe. And if the voters where I represent don't like that, they'll throw me out of office and they'll elect somebody who does want to do taxes for dividends, okay? That's how I feel. Okay, so why is the dividend important, and why do I actually want to make sure that the state has strong fiduciary responsibility to maintain it, right?
I can't wait to hear this, because you're going to have to be in favor of either taxes or cutting if you're in favor of the dividend, because it is going to go away. One thing is for sure and for certain, we're all going to agree. Government is going to continue to grow, and it's going to continue to demand more money. It can't print its own, so it's either going to take it from a tax or it's going to take it from the dividend. Those are the only two options that you've got. Okay, so what's your idea here? If you want to keep the dividend, are you going to cut, or are you going to tax, or are you going to do a combination of both?
So just some background. Most of this has been talked about, so I won't talk about the changes in the permanent fund. Angela did a pretty good job of kind of explaining like that, so I'll skip over that. But I like the dividend because the dividend acts as a de facto spending cap on government spending. Do you know why? It forces everybody who votes for wasteful spending to justify to their constituents why they want to give Dolly Parton another $1 million to send books everyone throws in the garbage bin, right? And take it out of your PFD. By the way, my kids get the Dolly Parton books. I love those Dolly Parton books. But I'll tell you what, I'm not going to give her $1 million of state money. I'll go to Dollywood and take my kids to her resort, though. That was fun, you know. But this is what I mean, guys. Just because people want to spend money on stuff doesn't mean the efficacy of the spend is wise spend, all right? I've had so many conversations on house finance with people, and almost everybody who wants to spend money on some sort of government program, they come from a good place. They want to say, I want to help kids, I want to help people, okay? Very rarely are you going to find folks that actually look at the efficacy of how the money is spent, i.e. two questions. First is where the money goes and what the money does. You got 40 people in the House and 20 people in the Senate, and very few of those people can actually answer those questions, okay? So before you end the PFD, before you tax people, you should probably answer the fundamental question, what does the money you spend already do, and where does it go, right? So I'll skip over that too. My fiscal policy position, very simple. States should not implement bribe-based taxes unless PFD is gone. States should prioritize sustainable revenues, resource development, fiscal discipline over program expansion, because a strong PFD, disciplined spending, actually equals long-term stability, and I'll tell you why, okay? The main reason why is the future of Alaska is built on resource development, okay? We are a one-trick pony people, right? We are an extraction state. Ideally, we will make investments so we can be a value-added state to the resources we extract, but we have 734,000 people who live in this state. We have the biggest coastline in the entire country. We are geographically 1/3 of the United States, and there is no combination of income tax or state sales tax that's going to raise you $15 billion, people. It is squeezing a lemon that doesn't have a lot to give. So unless you decide that you want to maintain something that keeps the voters of this state tied to resource development, all you're going to end up having is a trust fund that people spend money out of that will never provide enough revenue for all the needs and wants of the state of Alaska, okay? So you heard folks talk about, and we'll get in this Q&A later, and I know I'll wrap up here soon because I'm probably almost out of time, but you heard folks talk about how we have all these needs in the state. Folks, Alaska spends the largest per capita of any state in the entire country and it's not close, okay? It's not close. You got a state that's got 734,000 people, and it's got a supermax prison in Seward, okay? Go to California and find me a town with 700,000 people that's got a supermax prison there and 17 other prisons, okay? If you want to be realistic about the future of the state, you can't think you're going to be all things to all people in a state with 730,000 people. So I think you should invest in the state's future. You should make cost of living go down. You should keep the PFD around, because otherwise you're going to get big taxes and you're going to go nowhere anyways, because people are just going to keep leaving here because there will be no economic opportunity in future. Because the alternative is what we're at right now, which, as I said earlier in Finance Committee, I'll use it again as a fun terminology. You don't want to be trapped in a bureaucratic malaise that's slowly designed to grind your soul into powder. So that's why you should keep the dividend. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, or thank you, Representative Stopp. I tell you, man, I am 0 for 2 on you two guys. One of you is going to have to wear a beard. Oh, darn it, here it is. Senator Robert Myers, he represents North Pole in the Fairbanks North Star Borough, Senate District Q. He is in the Senate minority. He was born in Fairbanks, grew up at the family's Salchaket Roadhouse. Did I pronounce that right? Salchaket, I was close. Put himself through UAF driving a tour bus, currently drives truck on the Hall Road, father of 5, ran for office to build in Alaska his children will choose to call home. Please help me welcome Senator Myers.
Appreciate it, John. So let me start off with a question for everybody here. And I think Will touched on this already a little bit. Thanks, Will, for stealing my thunder. So does it feel like Alaska is kind of stuck? We're in a little bit of a malaise, maybe, to use President Carter's word. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about why that is the case, how it's been going on a lot longer than we think, and honestly, how the permanent fund is helping to keep it going. So permanent fund, of course, starts with the old J. Hammond quote. Want to take finite wells of oil and turn them into infinite wells, pumping money forever at us here. And I say that because from an economic perspective, there is a lot of things in common between money coming out of oil wells and money coming off of investments, in this case, the permanent fund earnings. And it's especially interesting to watch the incentives that both of them create for government. So both of them are income streams that require little effort on government's part. They are heavily concentrated wealth compared to the rest of the economy. They carry the potential to be capital for business formation if they're allowed to do so. Because on an economic standpoint, the PFD is not just a check, it's effectively a stand-in for royalties that go out to individuals. And we're going to touch on that a little bit later. So I want to talk about 3 different disconnects that the permanent fund and originally the oil created in Alaska. Okay, because what we have done is we have disconnected state revenue from the economy as a whole. And all of this is perpetuated by using permanent fund earnings. So first off, we have separated the government from the economy. This is not a new idea. This was identified by Scott Goldsmith back in the 1980s over at ICER. And basically, the result is because government does not get its money from the economy, government doesn't care about the economy. At best, government is indifferent to economic potential, economic growth, you know, where most of us live and work and try to make a living. We hold yearly hearings in the legislature on oil income and on the permanent fund, but you hear almost nothing out of the legislature about hearings or other concern about the health of the private economy in general. And sometimes we're actually hostile to economic growth because economic growth means more people, which means more services, means more kids in school, more troopers, more road maintenance, you know, got to get more troopers on the road, keep us from doing stupid things on Friday night, etc. But economic growth does not mean more revenue to pay for all of those services. And that's part of the debate that we're having right now about the gas line. Does the gas line bring in enough revenue to justify the economic disruptions and the economic growth that it's going to create? Now, the second disconnect is the disconnect between the voters and the cost of government. Voters don't have to pay for government. From their perspective, everything is free. And human nature being what it is, if something is free, you always ask for more of it, right? That's why we love buffet restaurants. So the incentive is always to ask for more stuff. What the voters are missing, besides an incentive to ask for less, is an incentive to care about the quality of what gets spent. Because again, we're not paying for it. So why do we have an incentive to care about the quality? So because the average voter doesn't care about the outcomes unless there's a crisis, we're always leaning towards a crisis. Hence the deferred maintenance problem. I'm going to get to that in a little bit more. The third disconnect is we disconnect short-term thinking from the long-term consequences. Now, politics in general leads itself to short-term thinking because the election cycle, all of us are thinking about what we're going to do for the budget for 1 year, a 2 to 4 year election cycle. But in all of the other states around the country, everybody has to have the long-term consequences in the back of their head because they know that if they make a bad choice, it might not come back to bite you next year, but it will come back to bite you 10 or 20 years down the line. But because we have the oil revenue and now the permanent fund, we don't have to think about that in the legislature. So you can get some short-term benefits, such as certain types of taxes that we don't have to levy compared to most other states. We get high, but also highly variable spending. And those cause long-term problems, but the legislature is insulated from those long-term effects because there's no economic connection. The ICER research that came out at the beginning of this year also made it relatively clear that looking at the different types of revenue that the state can pull in, that oil and corporate taxes have the smallest short-term economic effects. But they also have the worst long-term economic effects because they build, they multiply, whereas things like personal taxes do not. So what have we done? We have chosen things that have the smallest short-term pain, because that'll get you reelected, but have the worst long-term pain, because by then, what do I care? I've already got the money, maybe I'm already out of office. That's not something I have to worry about. On the spending side, we do something similar. We build things, but we don't maintain them, because maintaining them is something boring that doesn't really get you votes, but building things does. So we spend, but we don't plan ahead. We spend based on what's politically popular, not what brings long-term growth. And we're now locked into that short-term model because the transition to a healthier long-term revenue stream would cause a lot of short-term pain, which of course would lead to a lot of politicians losing their reelection. So let me give you an illustration of that. As John mentioned, I'm a truck driver, so this one is a little near and dear to my heart. We're going to talk about road maintenance. Okay. This is an example of how our spending is disconnected by the economy and driven by election pressures instead. So this table on the right, which unfortunately Larry is sitting in front of a little bit. Larry, you're too tall. What I did here is I had my staff put this together a while back. We took the 1967 budget, which is the last budget passed before Prudhoe, and we said, okay, let's increase it by inflation and population, and then let's check that against what we actually spent last year. This is just general fund dollars, okay? This is not designated funds, this is not federal funds. And let's see what happens. Well, you're probably not surprised, most of them went up. You'll notice the big increases in education and health and social services spending. But I want to focus on the one that went down there in the bottom there. Department of Transportation. Now I said this is just general fund dollars. And this is just operating. This isn't the capital budget, just operating. That is important because that is where road and maintenance money comes from. We are increasing everything else and we don't maintain something. Okay? So we've had a lot of talk this year about the whole
Rob, since you're with us, if you're still with us, does that number include federal funds or is that just state funds? Because I can see how, as the federal government has increased amounts of transportation money, the state can shift the burden to the federal government, and it appears with state funds that you're spending less, but you're backfilling that with federal dollars. So just curious if what that number is.
The match bit. We want to meet the $70 million that the state needs in order to meet the federal match for all of our construction projects. But I've noticed that we haven't talked at all about maintenance, really. True to the short-term model, we're talking about what puts people to work in the short term. These are projects that put people to work for a summer or two, but we are not talking about how that brings us long-term growth, how any of those projects actually benefit the economy in the long run. We're just talking about doing the projects. And this ties directly into votes because legislators can point to specific projects which create specific jobs as benefits for re-election. But you can't make those same ties with maintenance because maintenance is a base service, not a project. It's not tied to an interest group like a trade group or a union. So there's no legislative champion. But it is tied to long-term growth because better maintenance means fewer economic disruptions, means less maintenance on our vehicles, because if DOT doesn't spend the money to fix the potholes, you and I get to spend the money to fix our cars instead, right? And we compound our problem by using federal match for quote-unquote reconstruction projects. The problem is that we just let the roads deteriorate until we can qualify as a reconstruction project. Then we go ahead and spend that federal money to rebuild something that we should have been taking better care of in the first place. But then that means that we now have less money from the federal government that we could be using to fund true expansion that actually lets our economy grow. So we scrambled for $70 million to meet the match, but we didn't talk about the fact that we cut maintenance by 12% last year. It's about $13 million. The problem isn't money. The problem is our priorities. And our priorities are driven by our revenue model. People want to people want to cut a government pie for contracts, which is largely what our capital spending has become. There's no concern for the wider long-term economy. The private sector needs stability and maintenance, not flashy projects. Extending to other areas, you can do a ribbon cutting when you build a new school. But you don't do a ribbon cutting when you patch holes in the sheetrock or you put it in new HVAC. And then we wonder when we've decided that our budget is going to help us for 3 elections, and we wonder why our schools start falling apart. So let me talk to you a little bit about what this does to our economy in the long run. This is a graph of Alaska's economy since 2005, already adjusted for inflation. This does not include oil or government. If either of them were on there, both of them would dwarf everything else. And you'll notice something interesting here, that since 2005, our economy has been more or less flat. We got 3 sectors showing growth, but there's a lot of caveats into that. So first off, that top line there is transportation. That's my bread and butter. Transportation, of course, is heavily tied to oil. And that includes, not only does that mean trucks taking things up to the slope, that also includes the pipeline. And as the pipeline has gotten older, we spend more money on maintenance, which means the numbers go up, but you're not really adding any production value. It's just that the share of the money going to the pipeline has to go up. Now, the one piece in here that is a little bit of a bright spot is this also does include increased air cargo over at Ted Stevens for the last dozen years or so. Now, that second line there, the green one, that's real estate. But that's not really productive growth either, because effectively what that is showing is not more transactions or more things being built. Really what that's showing is rising housing prices, especially rising rent here in Anchorage. And then the third line is healthcare. But again, healthcare spending is also heavily tied to government spending. My estimate, I'm having a hard time finding the firm numbers to back this up, but talking to some experts and looking at some trends from the last 10, 15 years, my estimate is that in this state, approximately 80% of our healthcare spending is done by government money in some way, shape, or form. Okay, so this is also reflected by the fact that we have an aging population, which has other implications for the system. The point here is that growth in our economy died long before the 2015 oil crash and the current fights over the PFD and other government spending. So it feels like we're missing something we need to grow. What we're missing is we're missing money that we need to jumpstart the economy because royalties go to government. Government doesn't pay attention to whether or not it's choking off economic activity. Unfortunately, what we're missing is small incremental gains that don't make the news but build healthy economies over time. We still have not diversified after 50 years of oil, because as I said, if oil was on the chart, it would dwarf all the rest of this. So let me give you the counterfactual. What if royalties went to the private sector instead? As I said, PFDs economically are a stand-in for royalties. There was an interesting study done in 2017 on natural gas growth in the UK and Pennsylvania between 2000 and 2014. In the UK, it's like Alaska, the royalties go to government. In Pennsylvania, it's primarily private landowners. So the short version, private royalties provide over double the economic bang for the buck compared to public royalties, despite higher natural gas prices in the UK at the time. And this is just the royalties. This doesn't even include other jobs or expenses from the industry expanding out into the economy. We already know that in Alaska, we have a shortage of capital for business formation, despite the fact that 89% of job growth in this state is in startups. What we have done is we removed the best tool that we have to grow and diversify the economy. And we can talk about the inefficiency of handing out PFD checks and taxing it back, but the simple fact of the matter is we get more economic activity that way. And there's a reason that when Milton Friedman was up here in the late 70s talking to us about what we should do with our oil money, he said that we're best off handing out the money to people as checks instead of increasing government spending. And it's important to note that he said that in 1977, which was before the income tax repeal. So I know Ross is over telling me I've got to finish up. Last one. So last one here. So to sum this all up, we have a flat economy. Median household income growth in this state since 1970 has grown at roughly the same rate as a Rust Belt state. Since 1984, we have had the worst household income growth in the country. What we've done is we've deprived the economy of the capital that it needs to grow. We've encouraged reliance on government for both people and businesses. We've discouraged long-term thinking. And then we wonder why working-age people with families are leaving the state. This is both the group that we need to build and the group most likely to think about long-term growth potential and trends, all because of the disconnects created by oil money and continued by permanent fund money. Reserving oil money almost exclusively, with the exception of the 25% of the royalties going to the permanent fund, reserving all of that exclusively for state spending was the wrong choice back in the 70s. And we risk doing the same thing with permanent fund money now. Permanent fund money is being used to continue spending without connection to either the economy or the voters. In the 70s, we assumed more money was better, especially if it meant no taxes on residents. But we didn't think about the different incentives and distortions that each revenue source creates. We thought about the oil money ending, but we didn't think about how we would grow and diversify the economy beyond oil in the future. Thank you.
All right. Well,
Rob, I really appreciate that. I suspect that much of what you said went right over everybody's heads like a 747. I think that we're, Alaskans are not thinking that far ahead and that big. Kudos to you, because we need to. Somebody has to continue to have this conversation and elevate our thinking. Okay.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is the part of the evening where we open this up to questions and answers from the audience. For those of you online, I missed this in the earlier thing, but if you are online, I guess we can send in questions via text. The number is 1. Oh, they can do it in the chat. All right, never mind. I'm not going to give you the 1-800 number. I was feeling.
Dean, yeah, this is one of the things that others have talked about throughout this meeting, this presentation tonight, is 100% re-elections are driving priorities for what is possible within the legislature.
So you stay happy, stay positive. You can ask hard questions, just don't ask questions hard. So, all right, wow, you were right. All right, we'll start right here on the front row.
That's good.
Thank you all for the panel, for joining us. I really appreciate that. I'm Bart Laban. I served in the Alaska State House for 4 years. They're in the middle of all of this drama with the PFD, so that's not a new topic for me. But I'm just curious if the panel would like to weigh in on a point that Angela made, and that is Alaska Permanent Fund keeps its money in 2 accounts, an earnings reserve and the principal. No other state does that. They have one single fund endowment. So the first question is, do you support consolidation of the permanent fund into a single fund endowment? And then the second part of the question would be the percent of market value draw. That's not protected in the Constitution, so that's subject to appropriation. The legislature could draw 6, 7, 8% at any given time. Would you support putting the percent of market value draw in the Constitution, and what percentage would you support?
You know, wealthy people are really worried that the legislature is going to pull a fast one and spend the money out of the earnings reserve account and put somebody on the hook for paying for state government because there isn't any money left in the earnings reserve account. If you didn't have, if you spent that money on, say, a natural gas pipeline, or you spent it on a hydroelectric dam, right? Whatever it is, $18 billion that's in it. Don't quote me on that number. Whatever that dollar figure is, it's a big dollar figure. But if you just spent it one year and it wasn't there the following year, then whatever the investment earnings for that following year, that's all you would have to spend out of the earnings reserve account. And it might not be enough to meet your 4.5% or 5% draw. Okay. And then the state government would be looking at oil money plus a smaller permanent fund earnings. There'd be no dividend. And it wouldn't be enough for government. And the question would then be, per Representative Hall's statement, well, we've got all these constitutional responsibilities and now we have to spend it and we don't have any money. So we're going to take it out of savings. Well, what if savings is gone? Because we used to have $16 billion in the savings account in our CBR, our Constitutional Budget Reserve, and money in our statutory budget reserve. And we spent all of that from 2013 to 2000, let's say 18, 19 timeframe. We spent all that down to next to nothing, 1 or 2 billion left in the fund. Okay. So that's what the legislature would do, is spend its savings. What happens when the savings is gone? Your ERA is gone. We only have 3 billion, maybe 4 billion in the CBR right now. Nothing to say in the statutory budget reserve. So we're functionally out of money if the ERA were to be spent. Then who would pay the taxes? Are you going to go to the fishing industry? Are you going to go to the tourism industry? Are you going to go to the healthcare industry? Are you going to go to oil industry and add more taxes onto oil? Probably. I mean, that would be your politically your easy another easy button to hit, right? Or do we go back to an income tax, a graduated income tax, progressive income tax, where the wealthy in the state would have to pick up the tab? So this is what I'm thinking, is that people who are wealthy, who are in the upper income brackets, are worried that the legislature is going to do something irresponsible, and you'll end up with an income tax and the wealthy people are going to have to pay taxes, because that's what's happening in every other state. It's always a conversation between spending and your wealthy people needing to pay more. But in the state of Alaska, we don't have that conversation. So you've got people who are wealthy saying, I don't want to pay taxes, therefore we're going to take the PFD and we're going to make it go away so that I don't have to pay taxes. But that means lower income people who are benefiting from the PFD. That means the private economy that is benefiting from the PFD. Those transactions and those people, they don't matter. They don't matter nearly as much as the wealthy people saying, don't tax us. Okay. So it's a incentives and trade-offs here. Who cares about the size and the spending of government, as we just heard Senator Myers talk about? Our per capita spending is out of this world. It is unsustainable. It is unjustifiable. We're a jobs program. It's unjustifiable for the amount of people that we have and the infrastructure that we have to manage. It's unjustifiable. But we continue to just pay it because that's like, we don't care. The money's coming from places where we don't have to pay taxes. We don't have to, if it's coming from oil, it doesn't hurt us. If it comes from the permanent fund, it doesn't hurt us. If it comes from savings, it doesn't hurt us. The only time that it's going to hurt us and we're going to question whether we should spend it or not is if it comes from our pocketbook. And that is where the wealthy people in this state are looking at it and saying, well, I don't want to pay taxes. I moved here because there weren't taxes. Yeah, but you're not putting input in to the size of government conversation. You're not telling the government that it needs to do with less. All you're doing is saying, tax somebody else. Take it out of the dividend. That's the conversation that's happening or not happening, as it were. But that's the structure that you have down in Juneau. That's what all of this is all about. It's tax avoidance from somebody because we're not having the conversation about the size and scope of government. Again, to my own caucus 2 years ago, well, now 3 years ago, $300 million in unfilled vacancies. That is a giant slush fund for state government. I said, fine, some of those vacancies are legitimate. They'll be hired within this year. So let's cut $200 million. Leave them $100 million for vacancies. Give me $200 million in cuts. Oh, you don't want to do 200? Well, then let's reduce it to 100 million. Let's do a third of it. I can't even get Republicans in the House to champion that. We're in charge of finance, co-chair of finance. No, we're not going to address unfilled vacancies. Chair of finance doesn't have to pay taxes. What does she care? None of these legislators have to pay taxes. What do they care?
And before we get to that, I forgot one last thing. Could I get you all to move your chairs over here so people can see you, because it's a little hard. And I think we're going to
go down. You don't want to create a situation in which the draw on the fund exceeds the overall value net earnings indexed to inflation, right? So you can calculate that in a bunch of different ways. We talk about this a lot, maybe 4.25, 4.75, something like that. But I'll tell you why. I mean, in theory, it's sad that you even got to do that, right? It's sad. So this is artificial distinction. The reason you don't want to keep $12 billion around is because people in the legislature are going to spend it. Right now, they don't want to spend it on big dividends, but when oil price falls, they're going to spend it on school maintenance or BSA formula, folks. Like, that's why you got to take it away from people. Like, I'm dead serious. Like, everyone says, oh, well, I will never crack that 5% draw on the permit fund POMV. You know what people said in the state? They said we would never take the ERA and people's dividends, that's sacred. And then
it takes a 3/4 vote. 3/4 of the legislature has to agree to spend out of the constitutional budget reserve. And we spent nearly $16 billion from 2013 to 2016, 17 timeframe. 3/4 vote to continue spending. It's a simple majority to spend out of the ERA. So Representative Stapp is 100% correct. You get a downturn. You get a downturn in the worldwide economy, and you have a reduction in permanent fund earnings. You have a downturn in the U.S. economy. You have high inflation. Whatever the thing is that causes the state budget to suffer, you have a demand for spending come up. It is so easy for the legislature to spend from that ERA. That is what people are worried about. They see that risk. So let's get rid of that risk. Okay? And we will ensure that government gets its money. We will ensure that government has enough to be able to do what we want it to do, what the big government spenders want it to do. It is a lie, in my opinion, to think that the government is ever going to be happy with just the permanent fund earnings. Government is going to come after taxes as soon as it consumes all of the dividend, because that's what it does. That's what government does. It consumes its savings. It consumes all available sources of revenue, and it continues to grow. And that demand, if you do not have a commensurate increase in the size of your private economy, and as you do your government spend, then you're building dependency in, and there's going to be more and more demand for government. that means there's more and more demand for spending, and you're going to get taxes. That is just what's going to happen.
Happen, all right? So the only way you prevent that stuff is to protect it by in the Constitution. Otherwise, people are going to get elected and they're going to spend the money. So don't do that.
I feel similarly to my friend here to my left. Yes, I believe that we should have a single account structure. I don't remember the name. Representative Calvin Schrage has a bill that would, if passed, have a vote to go to the people for a constitutional amendment for it to be a single account structure. I strongly support that. I co-sponsored that piece of legislation. And when it comes to having the POMV draw in the Constitution, yes, absolutely. I think the percent should probably be about 4.5%, right around in that area. Just, I tend to be pretty fiscally conservative when it comes to just our overall state financial outlook. Yeah, I think I'll just leave it there.
So when Angela was up here, she mentioned that no other state does it in the 2-account system that we do. But I did notice that on a couple of her slides that a couple of the states did have a protection of the corpus. You can't draw from the corpus in their case. And I also noticed that she mentioned that I think it was New Mexico said once you drop below 17 billion, you can't draw anything. That's effectively what our 2-account system does. You know, the accounting side of it might be a little bit different, but the effect of it is the same thing. It keeps us from dropping below a certain amount. And the POMV draw rate is an interesting one. So we just had a presentation from Callan, the Permanent Fund consultants in Senate Finance a couple of weeks ago. One of the things they mentioned is they said, if you take we draw from the fund based on a 5-year average. If you take all the 5-year averages of earnings from the last 30 years, the average earnings was lower than 5% plus inflation, 14 out of those 30 periods. If you drop it down to 4.5, instead of being 14 out of 30, it's 11 out of 30. Okay, so we've gone from 48% down to 37%. Is that better? Yeah, a little bit, but it still puts you in a place where you could potentially be drawing faster than earnings plus inflation's coming in. So we're in a difficult spot here. I don't think that is the only thing that doing that is going to fix it on its own. You know, we also have to talk about how much the fund is earning compared to the fees that we're spending. When we're spending almost $1 billion a year on the fees just to get our earnings, are we really getting our money's worth with those fees? So we got a few other pieces to talk about there. And then of course the question is, what are we spending it on? If the point is just to grow a fund, well, we're best off just not spending it all on either government or dividends. But the question of if you have a savings account, the question is always, what are you saving for? Well, if we're just saving for government spending, we're going to be in a world of hurt, as I went over. If we're saving to put some money into the private sector, it's probably going to be better off in the long run. And if we're going to talk a constitutional amendment, we're going to have to address that split.
So I'm not a legislator, so I don't get to vote on the endowment, but instead I wait for legislators to vote, and then I write columns criticizing how they vote.
It's a good business model.
Okay, so I guess, but one thing that hadn't come up yet, so yeah, endowment, that's great. You protect the whole thing. You don't have this arbitrary line between the principal and the earnings reserve, which everyone admits you can spend legally. It's probably need to look at the 5%. The problem is, even if everybody agrees, or most people agree, we need to go to a true endowment model. It takes 2/3 majority in the Senate, 2/3 majority in the House to put a constitutional ballot before voters. The problem is getting to those numbers, because there are many legislators who say, if we're going to amend the Constitution, we're going to go the endowment, we're going to put percent of market value in the Constitution. I want the dividend in the Constitution, and then forget it. You're never going to get close to 2/3 majority. You need to separate it, or separate the political fight. Otherwise, you don't get to 2/3.
Angela, somehow we skipped you. Do you want to weigh in on this one?
Especially the fees.
I'm not sure where to weigh in on this, other than to say that I've been consistent in my advocacy for a single fund. This has been a priority of the Board of Trustees of the Permanent Fund since 2000, easily. It has come very close within one vote of moving out of the legislature onto a ballot. There are a number of unwieldy accounting rules and mechanics that the permanent fund deals with that as legislators, as Alaskans, we don't have to think about, we don't have to worry about, but would protect the fund, deeply protect the fund. And just like that constitutional amendment, saving the money for the permanent fund made sure that there is $80 billion there today, unlike the Alberta fund, which I did not talk about. A spending rule that is in the Constitution would have a similar effect long-term and provide long-term stability for the fund. So
the fund itself, excluding earnings, is at no risk of being spent. The only thing that's at risk of being spent is the earnings of the fund. Okay? That's a portion of your total fund. But that's the only thing that's at risk. The fund itself is not at risk. As soon as you combine the two accounts and you allow the legislature to spend from the combined account, even if you put a percentage in the Constitution, this is what Senator Myers was just talking about. Even if you put 5% draw or a 4.5% draw in the Constitution, Callan, the Permanent Fund Corporation's consultants, will tell you 30% of the time each year, 30% of the years, you're not going to beat inflation. Your earnings plus inflation doesn't equal what you're drawing. So with a combined account in those years, 30% of the time, basically, you're going to draw down the corpus, you're going to draw down the principal in order to pay your draw. Your 4.5%, even if you reduce the amount that you're going to draw 30% of the time or thereabouts, you're going to be spending that money out of some of it, out of the principal of the fund. And this is not just a this year problem because you spent out of savings. It is a future year problem because as soon as you remove that money from that fund, dollar cost averaging over time means that you lose future earnings potential from that money. So the following year, not only are you putting back, if you were going to repay the amount that you took out of the principal, you didn't just draw from earnings, you draw from the principal. So if you were going to pay back the earnings for that next year, you would also have to repay what those earnings could have earned into the future. Nobody's talking about that. They say that they're going to protect the fund by protecting the earnings reserve account. That's not the same thing. As soon as that earnings reserve account is rolled into the corpus or the principal, and the principal you're able to spend from it, then there will be a portion of the time where you're drawing from the principal to pay your draw. That is not protecting the fund. That is protecting the spend. That's making sure that no matter what, you're going to have your 4.5% draw, your 5% draw, whatever it ends up being. That's what you're protecting. You're protecting your government economy. You're protecting the money that the government gets to spend on government. And who are you protecting ultimately? You're protecting the other taxpayers that are not paying taxes to pay for government. So I'm back to my original statement, whether it's oil companies, whether it's the wealthy, it's not the poor. Who's going to tax the poor? It's the wealthy. It's the business owners. It's the oil companies. All of those are like, hey, we don't want it. Don't tax us. Go ahead and spend the dividend. Go ahead and spend the permanent fund, because that's what we're talking about. If we're going to go to a single account structure, 30% of the time or better, you're going to draw from the corpus of the fund in order to pay your government services. Those people are going to be completely okay with that as long as you don't tax me. Representative Stepp, love you, brother. You're okay with that. Don't tax me. Take it out of the corpus. And to the point for Senator Rob Myers, we're not talking about incentives, because if everybody in the legislature is focused upon the right thing to do with that spend out of the permanent fund earnings year after year after year, nobody is having the conversation about growing the economy and growing more wealth that generates more money for government to spend. An AI data center could come in. What good does that do to the state budget? It doesn't. It has no impact. You could have oil wealth turned in, or oil, the actual oil. The ships come into Nikiski, drop off oil from taps, or wherever they would go. But right now they come into Nikiski. You could have an additional petrochemical industry crop up, just theoretically. But if that's not paying taxes through, and that may be a bad example because they'd be paying taxes through the oil company, oil taxes, but maybe not, maybe not. What I'm trying to say is any other economic activity that is happening that's not currently taxed is not going to bring revenue to the state government. So the legislature is not concerned about that. Here is why why there's not a full court press to get low cost energy, to build a hydro dam or another coal plant or a gas pipeline, because the private industry could really use that, but the government could care less. The government industry is going to get its money. When the heating bill rises, or the electric bill rises in your government building, is there pressure within the government to find alternative energy? Is there pressure to find cheaper energy? No, because the budget is going to cover it. You're going to find somebody to tax, or you're going to take dividend. The government is always going to get its money. So it doesn't care whether it's got low cost energy. It's not a function of what government cares about. It's always going to find it, especially in the state of Alaska. It's going to find it from somebody. But what do families here need? Families are feeling the pinch with regard to transportation costs, with the fuel at the pump, prices at the pump. They are feeling the pinch with regard to food prices, and they're certainly feeling the pinch with regards to the cost of electricity and gas. Those inputs into our private economy matter. Businesses are feeling the same pinch with regard to the cost of energy. But the state government, the legislature, is not focused. What are they focused on? They're focused on, in some respects, they're focused on alternative energy. The bureaucracy is focused on windmills and solar panels. Why? Because there's federal dollars attached to that. Does that end up lowering the cost of electricity to users on the rail belt? Not in the long run, it doesn't. It's not elsewhere unless you have copious amounts of energy like sunlight. We don't in Alaska. If those projects were cost effective, they'd be being built already. The point is, whatever is cost effective, whatever is firm energy, whatever is necessary for our private economy, our legislature should be bending over backwards to make that happen. That would help a private economy grow. That is not part of the conversation that is happening in Juneau, and it hasn't for many years. How we can get government money over towards green energy, clean energy, wind and solar, how we can get government money over there. That's what the legislature cares about.
I think having that constitutional amendment, whether it's 5%, 4.5%, has a floor, doesn't have a floor, that's the debate. that we get to have. But obviously, there's the possibility, I mean, Texas has a 6%, but it's over 10 years, and it continues to grow. New Mexico put a minimum floor of $17 billion. That was probably half of what they had at the time. And so it seemed like a good measure. So there are ways to limit this and create downside protection. But I personally would love to see a constitutional spending rule. And Larry's right to raise the dividend as a specter out there. And I think Will made a really good argument for how it creates a natural spending cap because it has to fight with everything else. And so,
I take exception to this because it is only an effective spending cap if you stand by it. But if the alternative is taxes or the alternative is cutting spending, then you just reduce the size of the dividend. So it's not an effective spending cap. It's not effective if it continues to decline. If it's the easy button, meaning the other alternatives are the harder buttons that people don't want to push, we don't want to cut spending and we don't want to institute taxes, so the dividend's the easy button, you're setting up, you're pointing to it as being a spending limit, and it's the easy button. It's a perverse argument. The only reason that it's a spending limit is because we currently are paying it. When we stop paying it, it will no longer be a spending limit. This is nonsense to say that the permanent fund dividend as it's currently structured, meaning the legislature not following the statute, meaning it's just an appropriation, it's just a decision that the legislature gets to make every year. That's not a limit. That's not a limit. It may look like a limit because you could have more spending if you didn't have the dividend. But as soon as those spending increases, right? The government, education needs more money. Deferred maintenance needs more money. Union contracts get signed and employees need more money. As soon as all of that happens, then you have to make a decision. Do you cut? Do you raise taxes? Do you take more of the dividend? The dividend's the easy button. It's not a spending limit.
I have confidence. I don't know why I say that today, but I have confidence in our elected officials to try and figure out how to solve this problem. Because as Carolyn said, this is a problem that needs to get solved. It needs to get solved because it continues to distract us from investing in this state.
Okay, we're going to pause here for just a second. And I'm going to show you something else. All right, folks. You can go online. There's the address. Just Google Fiscal Policy Working Group, Alaska Fiscal Policy Working Group, and you're going to be able to see this, okay? It's not very big. Let me make it a little bigger here. And notice that this is 32nd legislature. This is 2021, okay? Here's your makeup of this Fiscal Policy Working Group. I was on it. You've got Senate majority and Senate minority. You've got House majority, House minority. Representative JKT, Jonathan Christ Tompkins, gubernatorial candidate. Senator Shelley Hughes, gubernatorial candidate. We recognize that we've got this problem and we need to find a solution. We met between July 7th and August 15th to talk through things. What are we looking for? Can we understand and come to a common definition of the problem? Okay. Can we provide some recommendations? Okay. So we talked about these things and we came up with some recommendations. They're not bills. They're not, here's a bill that you need to pass. It was general concepts. Okay. Parts of the solution. Here's what they said. Here's what we came up with. Constitutionalized single account permanent fund structure and draws limited by POMV. I didn't agree with it. This is not my plan. This is the group's plan. Constitutional certainty for the permanent fund dividend. I agreed with it. New POMV-based PFD formula. Wasn't too happy with that. Healthy capital budget. I'm okay with that. New revenues. Not really okay with that unless it's part of this plan. Budget reductions. I'm okay with that. Spending cap reform. I'm okay with that. Several year transition period. I'm okay with that. Resilience to fiscal stress. Certainly okay. Constitutional budget reform. I'd be okay with that too. A comprehensive solution must be negotiated and agreed to as a whole, not be taken up one part at a time, which is exactly what others in this current legislature are attempting to do. Pointing to this, this is Senator Giesel's work. This is one of my must-haves in this group, was to say that you can't just cherry pick these recommendations. Okay? Constitutional certainty for the PFD. The working group unanimously believes the constitutional certainty is needed to resolve the PFD question. 2021, we're having this conversation. You know why the only reason that we got to have this conversation, this working group, is because the House minority stood their ground and we almost shut the government down that year. And this is what we get as a consolation prize for allowing the budget to go forward. So we gotta have certainty for the PFD. A constitutional amendment that requires the PFD to be paid as provided by law, and then you follow the law. If it's in the Constitution that says by law, then you would have to follow the law because the legislature would be holding to the constitutional direction. Okay. You want to pay less of a dividend, then change the law. New POMV-based PFD formula. 50-50 of a POMV draw PFD formula as part of the comprehensive solution. Healthy capital budget. Assume $210 million in capital budget spending. New revenues. Didn't say what kind of tax, but recognize that as part of a comprehensive solution, you're looking for somewhere in the order of $500 to $700 million. Budget reductions. Looking for somewhere between $25 and $200 million range. Spending limit reform. Spending limit needs to be implemented. This is in 2021 that this recommendation gets presented to the legislature, and there's crickets. Crickets from leaders in the legislature as to solve. They don't want to solve the problem. Okay. Several year transition period. A stair-step approach that starts with a more modest PFD, meaning use the PFD, reduce the PFD to get to the full PFD amount as you both institute new revenue and reduce spending. Okay. It's a balanced approach to solving the problem. This narrative, especially by folks that are not wanting to do any of this, the narrative says, well, if you're going to put new revenues in, then you have to have, well, there's a deficit, a $1.5 billion deficit or a $1 billion deficit or whatever the deficit is. Well, you're going to have $1 billion in new taxes. Well, no, that's not accurate. If you cut somewhere between $200 and $500 million, then you don't have to raise taxes to spend that portion of it. So it's a balanced approach. Raise part of your revenue through some other taxation, cut government spending, and allow the PFD to go into the private sector. Then you incentivize growth within the private sector. CBR, resiliency to fiscal stress. Okay. So that's the recommendations that the legislature is sitting before it for since 2021. Okay. Now let me show you something else. And this is just a little bit more personal to me. Okay, when I'm chair of Ways and Means, I said, okay, let's take fiscal policy working group and let's put it into practice. Okay. Here are a collection of bills. They're not all my bills. There's a collection of bills that the legislature can start taking action on. Okay. The only one that we got to the vote on the House floor was HJR 7. Constitutional amendment for the permanent fund dividend. All it said was there will be a dividend and it will be paid by per statute. It just prevented the dividend from going away. Forced the legislature to follow a statute. Set the statute at whatever you want to set it at, but that's what you would follow. There's a whole bunch of other ideas from other people that wanted constitutional amendments and bills for what should be done to settle the PFD. Here's your options. We can have a discussion and talk about it because here's the options. This is a fiscal plan that we can talk about. Will Stapps, Representative Stapps, HJR2 is a constitutional appropriation limit, spending limit. He also had HB 38, I believe, too, which is a tie-in. It was a dual piece of legislation that did both. It was kind of a package deal. Economic growth, I said let's reduce the corporate income tax and spur economic activity with a reduction in corporate income tax. You can do that in balance with a state sales tax. Why? Because the state sales tax is tapping into a whole bunch of tourists that come into the state and don't pay anything for the services that they use, using the roads, police, whatever. Okay? You're raising hundreds of millions of dollars off your residents that are or non-residents that are coming in every year. The net of this is that residents would have more money in their pocket at the end of the year with a full statutory dividend and a sales tax and reducing corporate income tax than taking their dividend. But it means that people would have to be paying taxes. So if you're a wealthy person and you want to buy something, you're going to pay a tax to spend your money. If you're a poor person, you're going to spend your tax. It works the same way. Nobody passes a sales tax if you don't also pass a constitutional amendment for the dividend or a constitutional spending limit or other, and this has got the carbon offset. This is because we were discussing this with the governor, right? I'm not in favor of those programs other than they're required for business. I hope that whole thing is going away. I hope it is. Anyway, the whole point, the only reason that I'm bringing this up is that there was somebody saying, look, we have the bills sitting in the legislature right now. HJR 7 is sitting on the floor. All you have to do is start having the conversation and moving the bills from committee to committee, having the conversation, and then you can vote on a complete package. It is a possibility. So when Angela Rodell says, I have faith that our legislators can do this, I proved that it can be done. I proved that you can put on a piece of paper a list of bills that encompasses the fiscal policy working group recommendations, some or all of them, and move forward in a coordinated manner. We can do that. I agree with Angela Rodell. We can do that. Will we? That's a completely different question. It's a completely different question. The answer thus far has been no. We're not going to do that. What we're listening to people like Larry Pursley and like Carolyn Hall, like Representative Stapp, like Angela Rodell, is that we're going to do nothing until the pressure is right to do what we want to do, which is not a fiscal policy working group. It's not a comprehensive solution. It is getting rid of the PFD, ensuring that the government spend is taken care of by combining the two accounts. That's what the solution is for them. Getting rid of the dividend, making sure that nobody pays taxes, and government is taken care of. That's the play. The longer we wait, their model works. Government is going to continue to grow. Time is on their side. It is not on the PFD side. It is not on the private sector side. Time is on government side. So when any one of those people say, we got to separate the issue between the dividend and the combining the accounts, because if you're going to want to combine the accounts and that requires a constitutional amendment, then somebody's going to want the PFD and that just blows everything all up. Yeah, because you're not looking at it as a comprehensive solution. You're looking at it as you want your way and you don't want to compromise with anybody else in the state. That's what that means. So all we have to do is wait. All Larry Pursley has to do is wait until the government growth consumes the dividend, and then there will be no pressure for dividend anymore, because the alternative is cutting spending or raising taxes. And we know that even Republicans aren't going to do either of those. So time is on the government side. It is on the socialist side. It is on the progressive side. It is on big government side. That is what time is. That gets us more government and a permanent fund that is dedicated to government spending. That's what that gets. Totally disconnected from the private economy where most Alaskans live and work. So you want solutions? Look to your gubernatorial candidates. Are any of them talking about some sort of comprehensive solution? If they're talking about we need a PFD that we can afford, well, then that means you just get rid of the PFD. Eventually, you won't afford it. Bipartisan solutions, thus far, our Democrat-Republican majorities continue to get us nothing. They continue to just get us down the road, past the budget, don't do anything that's going to rock the boat. Don't even focus on a fiscal policy working group recommendations. We don't need any of these comprehensive solutions. And eventually the dividend will go away. So this bipartisan atmosphere that we have in the legislature is going to get you more government and no dividend and no concern for the private economy. That's what it gets you. It's what has gotten us thus far. All right. Rob says, answering Craig, Commonwealth North is a group largely against the PFD. They usually want to spend and not get taxed. Yeah. You know who's also in that category? Is your Alaska Chamber. You would think that your Alaska Chamber would be made up of businesses that would like to see permanent fund earnings being spent in business. But the Alaska Chamber does not take a stand on the PFD. The Alaska Chamber has for more than a decade said we want a spending limit. We want a spending limit. We've got two of them. We've got a constitutional limit that's completely irrelevant, and we've got a statutory limit that we ignore. We never follow that. Okay, so the chamber says they want a spending limit, but really what the chamber wants is a continuation of state spending to businesses that are reliant upon state spending. The state chamber doesn't want to pay more in taxes, so it'll allow the dividend to go away in preference to cutting spending or raising taxes. So this is the thing that happens with the status quo. Without the courage to do some sort of either you're going to elect people that are completely on the left and do away with the dividend, change the statute. There's no more dividend. Everything goes to the government. Elect a bunch of progressive leftists. If that's going to happen, then they're going to get their way. Or you have a bunch of conservatives, a majority of conservatives get elected, and then we have, well, I would hope that we would have something conservative done, but I'm not sure about that, to be perfectly honest. But you might have some conservative solutions. But what we've got in the state right now is this bipartisan atmosphere that just does nothing. And this is what I'm trying to articulate is that means the do nothing piece, the do the best that we can, means government wins. It means the PFD goes away because you don't have agreement on reducing spending or raising taxes. And that means the dividend goes away. Once it's gone, it's gone. You're not going to get it back. So I'm looking for some questions here. Dean asks a question. Thanks for participating from Facebook land. Dean, could the governor shut the heat off in the Capitol building as that line item is part of the unfunded part of government? I don't know the answer to that question. Theoretically, could the governor or his commissioners or his directors, could the bureaucracy shut their own heat off? Probably. I don't know what the incentive would be for them to do that, because if the bill for the heat gets paid, why would they need to do that? I mean, the government is not going to reduce its spending. The bureaucracy has to be forced to do that. They're not going to shut the heat off. Matter of fact, let me just point this out. You've got the building that is the legislative building, the Capitol, okay? Capitol building where the legislature meets. Directly across the corner there is the big tall building. Even on the weekends, all of the lights on every floor are all on. The lights in the building are always on. All of the lights are always on. If the government was really interested in saving money, they would have the automatic light switches that turn it off when there's nobody walking by. You would have efficiency in mind, and you wouldn't have power running to those lights. But you know what that building does for the ratepayers in Juneau? It reduces the cost of electricity for ratepayers. That's what more demand does for electricity rates. It helps keep prices down. You shut off the lights, and that means it makes electricity more expensive for everyone else. So no, Dean. Well, I mean, yes, Dean. I think the answer is yes. They could do that, but they're not going to. Okay, I'm looking here for some questions. Rob says we're the only state without a tax on medical providers to help pay for Medicaid. True statement. There's been a couple bills over the years to try to fix that, and it never goes anywhere. It's what I'm telling you. Some sort of a plan that does away with the status quo it's possible, but unlikely. Yeah, this is the point. The wealthy don't want a payroll tax. They'd rather take the PFD. It's 100% the case. Sharon Jackson was on board. Hey, Sharon, former Representative Jackson. Good to see your face there on the image. Thanks for stopping by. Yeah, I thought that was funny. She's fiscally conservative. It's like, I'm Republican. Just throw that out there and it confuses people. Dean says, we the people need a way to vote on prioritizing what we the people think is a proper program for government to provide. Why do we subsidize power in the bush? Is my power subsidized? And you honestly don't know. Well, I can answer that question, Dean. Power cost equalization is what you're talking about. When that program came about, it was a bipartisan agreement. It was an agreement that the Bush caucus agreed to support spending for infrastructure on the rail belt for power, in a nutshell. So the majority in the body was neither Republicans nor Democrats had the majority, and so they had to have a bipartisan majority. And the Bush Democrats came over to join with the Republicans, and the Republicans created this program where it said, we're going to set aside money into a fund. That's the Power Cost Equalization Fund, which the legislature can spend from. It's not constitutionally protected. $1 billion last I knew. Okay. And the investment earnings off of that fund through a formula get divvied out to Western Alaska, rural Alaska, for subsidizing or for helping pay the cost of diesel fuel and other high cost fuel. Okay. So the agreement was, we'll help you get your funding for your energy projects along the rail belt, but the Bush Alaska wants to be taking care of their energy as well. And while we're not going to be able to create, power between villages, and we're not going to be able to create a power station that's going to service all of the villages, what we can do is create a fund that provides money to alleviate the high cost of fuel. Okay. So that's where the PCE and the power subsidization of Western Alaska came from. It was an agreement. We'll help you get yours if you help us get ours. That's how it came about. That's why it's still in place, is because you got high cost out in Western Alaska. Yeah, I think this is you're probably right, Christopher, that you'll see an outward migration of people who have to pay, of wealthy people, people with good paying jobs, who have to pay a tax and a high cost of living. Okay. I think that's probably accurate. This is, again, why I am not in favor of a payroll tax, an income tax, whatever you want to call it, income flat tax, whatever. I'm not in favor of that. I'm in favor of a consumption tax, which means that if you have the disposable income to spend on things, then you help pay a tax and you keep the rate really low. So it's just pennies for most purchases. For your average purchases throughout the day, you go grocery shopping, it's a couple dollars and that's it. 2% rate. Okay. You spread it over as many people, as many spenders as possible. And that's how it's able to be. Other states that are moving away from an income tax to a sales tax are booming. It helps their economy. It helps their right-sizing their economy and their government relationship. That's what I'm saying. The other piece of this too is, if you look at the incentives, or look at incentives is the right word here. When you take a person's income tax and you take that from them, you're taking it out of their paycheck. They never get a chance to spend it, and it goes to government. somebody else is going to spend it on some government program. When you take a similar dollar out of a sales transaction, that money was spent by that employee in that sales transaction, and that private business benefits from that transaction. And then portion of that transaction is collected in a sales tax and then gets remitted to the state. So the incentive here is to prioritize spending within your private economy, and an income tax doesn't do that. Anyway, this is all irrelevant. I'm not in favor of solving a state's problem through increased taxation. That's not going to solve our problem. A balanced approach, and again, we go back to the whole resiliency thing that the Fiscal Policy Working Group said. Whatever you're going to do, make it so that the state is more resilient. That's what you get with a broad-based sales tax, is a more resilient state government. The government cares about the private sector growing, because if you have growth in the economy, then you have more revenue to the state, and it's spread across more taxpayers, more sectors. So it is more stable. Oil revenue is not stable. Permanent fund earnings, not stable. Broad-based tax, stable. But you keep the rate low, so nobody's getting gouged. We've got the benefit in the state of Alaska, if you had that and a permanent fund earnings coming out in dividend, that you're receiving money in one hand, able to spend it in the economy, and then you're paying a tax in the other hand, and it goes back to government. And it's a stable cycle that's happening. This nonsense that says, well, we can't have a dividend and a tax, just completely ignores the whole cycle of the spending of money. Anyway, thanks, Rob, for the plug here. 40% of my tax bill was people from out of state. That means that equivalent in dollar figures doesn't have to come from your dividend. Your dividend gets bigger because people visiting the state are paying that portion of government for you, and you don't have to pay it. We don't get that now. You would get a similar effect if you had an income tax and you were taxing people that didn't live here. Non-residents who are paying who would pay an income tax similarly, right? They're coming to the state of Alaska, they work here, they pay an income tax. Except if they have to start paying an income tax here, and maybe they have to pay an income tax where they're at, they probably stop working here. The other point is that you've got to raise, you have to have a much higher rate to raise the same amount of money as you would with a low rate sales tax. So the income tax part has to be much more oppressive and has much greater negative consequences than broad-based sales tax. Now, here's the thing. Western Alaska has got high prices already. And if you're going to put a broad-based tax, it disproportionately hurts Western Alaska. I get that, and I understand that. My sales tax bill said, you know what? Let's alleviate that by taking some of that state share of collected tax, and for those entities that can keep their property tax down, and Western Alaska doesn't have any property tax, a portion of that state revenue that's generated through sales tax gets distributed to your municipalities. It's a sharing of your state sales tax. So Western Alaska can alleviate the cost of of a sales tax through the revenue sharing that comes through that sales tax. That means the visitors that go to non-Western Alaska locations, okay, they never leave the rail belt. They're in Southeast Alaska, they're in South Central, they're in the interior, but they never travel out to Bethel. They spend their money in other portions of Alaska, and some of that economic activity goes out and benefits Bethel and your other areas. Now, the people in Bethel care that there's economic activity because they're benefiting from it. It is making a more resilient state because of the structure that you're putting in place. You can alleviate that higher cost of goods by sharing the benefit of that that taxation structure. Okay. There are things that you can do to make this wiser, to make us a more resilient and stronger state. But there has to be the political will to do some of this. Yes, but I think we're talking about the shutting down of lights or whatever. I think, Rob, I think I'm talking about the Department of Administration's building is what I was referring to. Okay. Rob says you'd be surprised at what the people of the state supports for spending. When 45% of your workforce makes their money from government, directly or indirectly, that's a lot of voters for spending. This is exactly it. And that just continues into the future when your good paying jobs funded by permanent fund earnings are going to be state jobs. And so you are literally creating a self-licking ice cream cone. People graduate high school and they're like, oil jobs have dried up. I know I see the people who have oil jobs and they drive the nice trucks, and these government jobs, people with government jobs, they drive nice vehicles. So I can go into the oil industry or I can go into state service. I guess I'm going to go to state service. Why would I go work for a company in the private sector? Because I see they're struggling. Like, we're in a bind, and we have got to have some people in the legislature and in the executive office that understand where money comes from. We must have a strong private economy. That used to be the oil company, the oil industry. That was our strong private economy, but we've shot them in the foot and run them out of state. We've got to do things that enable economic growth. The number one thing that we should be focused on is reducing the cost of power for the private economy. Number one thing. Reduce the cost of inputs to business. It helps business, it helps individual Alaskans. Okay. Who voted against your sales tax bill? Craig. The Republicans in Ways and Means would not allow me to move it out of committee, meaning they would not vote for it. I did not have the votes to get it out of Ways and Means. It's as simple as that. Democrats were willing to help me move it on. Democrats didn't want a sales tax. They wanted an income tax. But they were willing to move the bill out of the committee. The Republicans are the ones, the rest of the Republicans in the committee didn't want to be on the record as saying, I voted for a sales tax. Somebody would say, you voted for a sales tax. Because the ignorance of the public, when they see a committee vote, a committee thing, committee vote, would say, oh, look, you voted for a tax bill in committee. That's not what your vote means. Your vote is to move it out of committee. Your vote on the floor is for something. You can literally say, yes, move this bill out of committee, and my recommendation is do not pass it. That is literally what happens in committees. But this goes back to this, we don't do things because of the election cycles, right? Well, there's this ignorance in the public that says if you vote for moving a bill out of committee, then that means you support the bill. No, it doesn't. It means we've got other bills and other things that are stacking up, and we need this bill out of committee. Get it out of committee. Doesn't mean I'm in favor of it. Literally means I do not support this bill, and I do not want it in committee anymore. But that's not what the electorate is going to say. So your legislators refused to even move it out of committee. I want all of the bills that were, well, maybe not all of them either. Most of the bills that could be part of a fiscal plan, and certainly the ones that I was tracking, were either in Ways and Means, which was my tax bill, in House Finance, which is one step away from being on the floor, or it was on the floor. And that's why I kept HJR 7 on the floor for 30 days. It's like, no, hold on. Don't have a vote on it. Let's get some of these other bills moved to the floor so on one day we can have a debate over multiple bills in a fiscal plan. We're one committee vote away from having a spending limit on the floor. Two committees away from having a sales tax on the floor. You're one budget conversation away from reducing $200 million out of the budget for unfilled vacancies. And we couldn't get that to happen. This is a Republican problem. Nobody voted against my sales tax bill. Literally, if I couldn't get all of those, the other components of the fiscal plan, a spending limit, a PFD, I'm voting against my sales tax bill. Deshana asks if we think Trump invoking emergency powers to bolster U.S. natural gas LNG capacity will press some of the conversations going on in the legislature. Changing gears just a little bit here. I think our legislature and those that are in charge and in power right now are probably some of the most suffering of TDS in our nation. So Trump getting involved in this outside of a federal subsidy, if he coughs up $40 billion and says, here, we want this pipeline, here's $40 billion of federal money, make it happen, then I think our legislature plays ball. But Trump saying something or some other kind of political pressure, I think our leftists and progressives and greenies in the legislature they already hate Trump. So I don't know what he could do other than spending money that would encourage them. Craig, I think this is true. If you put a measure on the ballot that said a full PFD and a moderate sales tax, I honestly think that's true. You know why I think it's true? Because I've talked to a lot of people through an election cycle that said, where I had the time to explain to them what I'm thinking. And look, we've been on here for almost 3 hours. It's going to take me 10, 15 minutes to explain what I'm thinking. So it doesn't fit into a 30-second soundbite. But when I sit down and have the conversation with people, they come back at me like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, why aren't we doing this? I think if people understood the totality of the problem and the recommendations of this for a solution here, I think there would be broad support for it. Again, it is a fighting the ignorance. That's not an insult. It's fighting the ignorance of people who don't understand. Through my last campaign, I still ran into people who think that the budget is funded by oil money, that the largest source of money that's coming to our state government is from oil. People still don't understand that. It's like number 3. It's federal dollars, permanent fund earnings, and then oil. Yeah. We're in the soundbite culture. That's the hardest thing here, is to have a conversation about structure with people who understand what you're talking about. And again, it goes back to what I've been saying since day one. We have to grow the pool of people who are participating. And largely, this is the movers and shakers in our society. It is the people who get things done. It's the entrepreneurs, it's the business owners, it's the managers. It's the people who would rather not have the conversation with the legislature or deal with these problems. Those are the people that we need to have engaged. Where you can figure things out in a business setting, whether you're employed as a manager or you own the business. We need that skill set to come to the table and start figuring things out. Otherwise, you're going to have a state government that is completely funded by the permanent fund earnings and disconnected from the private sector. And it will spell disaster for private industry, private business. It'll just be a subservient industry to state government. Yeah, so I had that backwards, didn't I? 64. Well, wait, you're not talking about from the feds. 64% from the permanent fund, 24% from oil, and 12 from the rest. Yeah, the small other. I was, in my mind, I was thinking the chart from DOR that's got the federal spend, the permanent fund earnings, and the oil barrel. I think it's either federal dollars is number one, and then it's permanent fund earnings, or it's permanent fund earnings and then federal dollars. I can't remember in my mind's eye which one it was, but it's 1 and 2. Number 3 is oil. All right, folks. I hope this has been enlightening and helpful. I know we didn't get to all of the questions that were asked in the episode. The thing we watched 3 hours ago, started 3 hours ago, Commonwealth North meeting. You can Google it or search it on YouTube and watch it for yourself. Get the rest of the questions if you want. And I would encourage you to do so. There's probably some good questions there. Anyway, I hope you all have a good rest of your night. I'm going to sign off now, and we'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Thanks so much for participating. Look, if this was helpful, could use your support. Go to OversightLIVE.com and help support the show. It would also be helpful if you tell somebody about it. Share this on social media. Share it with your friends. If there are people out there that you know that say, why is this happening? Tell them to tune in. Shut the TV off or tune your TV to YouTube and then pick up your phone or whatever. Ask a question at 7 p.m. I'd love to help answer any questions that people have. So anyway, good seeing you. Thanks, Rob, for participating. And it's kind of strange having you on and then watching you, listening to you. Shh, don't talk about Rob. He's listening. All right, folks. We'll see you tomorrow night. Have a good night.